Hi everyone, it's Alice, and today we are doing a bit of a summer book haul. Books just seem to have accumulated over the past few months into this pretty big pile. Somehow, as if the somehow isn't just me buying books all the time, but you know how it is. I just get excited about a lot of the books that I find, and there's just so much that I want to read. I have a mix of fantasy, mysteries, historical fiction. I have some translated books and some graphic novels and some other things, so let's just get into it, and we might as well start with the biggest section, which is the fantasy books. The first one I have is one of my most anticipated releases of this year, actually. It's The Tapestry of Fate by Shannon Chakraborty, and this is the sequel to The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi, and I am so excited to have this. This series is like a mix of fantasy, historical fiction, and adventure, and the first book is one of my favorites. In the first book, we meet Amina, who is our main character, who is a legendary pirate who has retired, and she's basically pulled out of retirement to do one job, like a final job, and go on a final adventure. And there's a lot that happens in that first book, and this obviously continues on from that. I haven't really looked into what happens in this book, to be honest, but I'm very excited to read it. I'm just gonna go in and see. And there's some interesting stuff that happened in the first book that I'm curious about what happens with in here, and I'm just really excited to read this. I love adventure books, as you might know, and it's really hard to find the kinds of adventure books that I like, and I really loved the first one. And it's always fun to read about pirates as well, so very excited to have this. I also really like this cover. I have this sort of cover for the first book as well, so they match really well. And has like a map as the end papers, and I'm just so excited to have it. I'm trying not to get like my hopes up in a way, like I'm trying not to go into this with super high expectations, but it is very difficult not to because the first book was amazing. But if this book is half as good as the first one, I will be happy. The next two books are also actually books in series that I'm currently reading where I loved the first book. So we have these two. We have Tomb of the Sun King and Arrows of Fortune by Jacquelyn Benson. And these are the two next books in... I can never remember what the series is called. It's something about Arcana. Raiders of the Arcana or something like that. The first book is Empire of Shadows, and these are also like historical fiction adventure books, and I loved the first book, so obviously I want to read more. The series is set in the late 1800s, where we meet a woman who has aspirations to become an archaeologist, but it's very difficult in this time, of course, because she's a woman, and she basically finds finds and sort of steals this map to a lost ancient city. And there are some villains who also want this map, and it becomes a race to find this city first. And she goes into the jungle to find it, and she's accompanied by a surveyor who is very handsome, but also a little annoying. Tomb of the Sun King is the second book, and as I'm sure you can tell by the cover, it's set in Egypt. And then Arrow of Fortune is the third book, and I think this is set at least in part in India, maybe somewhere else in Asia as well. And I'm just really excited to have these books. I feel like the first book is really over the top and kind of ridiculous, but if you can get into it, it's a lot of fun to read. And like I just said, it's really hard to find adventure books that I like reading, and I really enjoyed the first one. So I'm just assuming I'm really going to enjoy these as well. I've also said this before, but the first book is the closest book that I've found that has the same vibe as The Mummy the movie, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. And even though the setting of the first book is pretty different, like the whole vibe of the book and the story is very similar, and it's a lot of fun. It's kind of like silly sometimes and a little ridiculous, but really, really fun. And I am very excited to read the second one in particular because it's set in Egypt, so I'm wondering if it's even more like The Mummy, but we'll see. And yeah, these books are just so much fun. No book haul of mine is complete without a book from T. Kingfisher. I'm always interested in reading her books, so I got 9 Goblins, which actually a couple of you have told me that I'm really gonna like, and I think I got a comment very recently that was like, I just read this and it was a lot of fun. So I'm excited to read this, and it is like a fantasy novella, so it shouldn't take me too long to read. I actually don't really know what this book is about. I know it follows some goblins, 9 of them, I assume, and there is something about a confrontation with an evil wizard, but That's all I really know. I'm just gonna read it and I'm sure it will be a good time. I always enjoy the books from this author, and I do like the idea of following goblins. Like, that sounds like a lot of fun. I also picked up Heather Fawcett's new book, which came out earlier this year. I think it was in January, maybe. It's Agnes Aubert's Mystical Cat Shelter. And this is the author who wrote the Emily Wilde books, which I loved, so of course I'm going to try this one as well. It's historical fiction fantasy romance set in the 1920s in Montreal, and we follow this woman who runs a cat shelter, and I think she gets a new landlord or something, and this landlord is a little shifty, and he uses this cat shelter as a front for his illegal magic business or something, and this attracts some scary people into both of their lives. It sounds kind of cozy and magical, although I will say I have heard sort of mixed reviews for this. I kind of feel like I'm still gonna enjoy it. I don't really know what I'm basing that on. I'm just assuming. I do think following Emily Wilde is like very, very difficult, so I know it's not going to be the same, but I think it will still be enjoyable. And I have to say, I do really like this cover. Of course, I also have a witchy book in the mix. It is The Witch. And to be honest, I just came across this in a bookshop and I really liked the title and the cover, so I was like, yes, I will try that. It's set in a small French town where this woman is trapped in a cruel marriage, and she comes from a long line of witches, and in her line, the powers are passed from mothers to daughters, and I think the story is a lot about her passing her powers on to her twins. And it sounds weird. I'm getting like a weird vibe from this book, which can go both ways for me. Sometimes I really like those kinds of books, sometimes I don't. But very often I like them even when no one else does. So we'll see. It does say on the back that it's dreamlike and unsettling, which is interesting. And it is a book translated from French, and I've had really good luck with French translations in recent years, so that makes me excited as well. I don't really know what to expect from this, but I'll read it and we'll see. Last for the fantasy, we have a book that I've had my eye on for a while. It's The God of Endings by Jacquelyn Holland. And this is a vampire book, I'm pretty sure. And I really want to read more vampire books, but it's hard for me to find ones that I'm like interested in and that I think I'm gonna like, but this sounds really good. It follows the main character who has a secret, and the secret is that she has been immortal since 1835. And I think that we meet her 150 years later, and I'm assuming that she's the vampire. And she's running like an elite art school, and the story takes off when this gifted but troubled student comes into her life, and I'm guessing causes some problems. I can't remember if I've seen any reviews for this. I don't remember where I found this because I've had it on my list for quite some time. But it does sound like the kind of vampire book that I might like, and yeah, I don't really know what to expect, but we'll see when I read it. I feel like I say that about all of the books that I get, but obviously you won't know until you've read it. Then we have some books in the science fiction realm, starting with The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard. And this was recommended to me by one of my friends, so I figured I would give it a go. I don't really know a lot about this, but it does kind of sound like the kind of science fiction that I could like. It's kind of hard to explain, and I'm not sure I'm totally grasping this, but the story follows this 16-year-old girl, I think, who wants to get on this council in her little town. Like, she is working to get on this council, in part because if she's a part of the council, she can decide who gets to enter their very isolated town. And it seems like no one really ever goes there or comes there because next to them, like in the town over, it's the same town, but it's 20 years in the past. And then on the other side, it's the same town, but 20 years in the future. And I think this town just repeats endlessly. And obviously, getting a visitor from any of these towns would be really weird. I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, but that's kind of all I know. And as I've mentioned many times before, I really like books that play with time, so I think that element will be really interesting. And it just sounds like an interesting read. The second one is a book that I've also been eyeing for a while, and this is a book that has popped up in several different places where I get book recommendations. And several people like that I watch online and stuff, or like Instagrams that I follow, that like the same books as me really like this one. so I'm guessing that I'm gonna like it as well, is The Wall by Marlen Haushofer. The main character in here is a woman who is on holiday in the Austrian mountains, and she's there with some people, and one day they go for like a walk or something, but then they never come back, and so she goes looking for them, and somehow she finds this transparent wall. I'm guessing maybe she like walks into it or something. And on the other side of that wall, everything appears to be dead. And it seems like she's in some sort of like pocket, I guess, where there is life, but she can't leave. And obviously, everything on the outside doesn't appear to be alive. So she has to stay in this place and try and figure out how to survive alone. Again, it sounds like an interesting read, and I think this originally came out in the 60s, and I just feel like this is gonna be a thought-provoking read. Next, we have a couple of mystery and horror books, and the first one that I have is actually a short story collection. It's Midnight Timetable by Bora Chung. This was actually also recommended to me by someone that I know, and these are short stories, but they all revolve around this research center or something. And so the stories are interconnected, but I think we meet different people and we see different perspectives, and that sounds very interesting. With short stories, I don't really like looking into them too much. I just like get them if I get them recommended to me or I find an interesting one and I just read them and see how that goes. It's always hard to tell with short stories, but yeah, this research center sounds intriguing. The other one I have is The House of Mirrors by Erin Kelly. And the reason that this one caught my attention is that I read somewhere that this has like gothic vibes to it, or at least in part the story feels a little bit gothic. And I think we all know how much I love a gothic atmosphere. I think this is set mostly in London, and we follow a main character who lives a pretty normal life. She's married, she has a daughter, she runs this like vintage shop of some sort, but she is carrying a terrible secret, which is something that happens in 97, I think, where someone was killed. And I don't know how she was involved in that or what she knows, but I'm guessing this is the kind of story where like the past catches up with her. It's been a while since I've read a mystery thriller like this. I used to read these all the time, and then for some reason I don't read them as much anymore, but I do really like them, so I'm intrigued to read this, and I do also really like this cover, even though it's really weird. Moving on, we have a pretty big historical fiction section, starting with a book that there's been a lot of buzz around, especially right now. It's Yesteryear by Caro Claire Burke. This is a bit of a mix of genres, so it could technically go into several of these categories, but it basically follows a trad wife influencer who sells her lifestyle online and sort of, you know, sells this perfect lifestyle and doesn't really tell people that she has a lot of help on this farm where they're at and all of these things. And then one day she wakes up in the 1800s in like this lifestyle that she's been selling, but it is the actual lifestyle and there's not a lot of help and she's stuck in it. And that is obviously very different from what she used to live. Very timely topic, I feel, and a very interesting concept. I've actually already read this one because I just had to read it right away, and I'm gonna review it at the end of the month, but I will say I have a lot of thoughts. The second one I have is The Last of Earth by Deepa Anappara, and this is set in 1869, and we follow both an Indian school teacher who is spying for the British and this English lady explorer, and somehow they team up to go to Tibet together, which at the time is a very closed country. And I think the school teacher is going there to search for a friend who has gone missing, and the lady explorer is going there because she wants to be the first woman to reach the capital city of Tibet. I'm not totally sure how they come together, but the thing that really caught my eye about this is the lady explorer part, because I just love reading books like that, and it does sound like they go on a little bit of an adventure, which I'm always interested in reading. Next, we have Junie by Erin Crosby Eckstine, and this one I really like the cover of, especially the colors. This is also set in the 1860s actually, but it's set deep in the American South, and we follow this character who is a slave and has been a slave at this plantation in Alabama her whole life. And I don't know how old she is. I think maybe she's like teenage years, 16, 17, and she spends most of her time taking care of the master's daughter, I think. She dreams of another life for herself, though, and I'm not totally sure what happens, but somehow she rouses the dead spirit of her sister. So I think she like summons her ghost or something. And I don't know what triggers that, but clearly there's some supernatural elements in here. And that's all I really know. I read about that part and I was like, yes, I would like to read that. And I don't want to know much more. I'm just going to read this and see what I find. But I've seen some really good reviews for this, so I'm very excited to read it. I also have a really good feeling about this next one. It's There Are Rivers in the Sky by Elif Shafak. And I have a good feeling about this in part because I've read some books by this author and really liked them, and in part because several of you have just read this book and loved it, which makes me very excited to read it. I actually don't want to look too much into this either, in part because it sounds kind of complicated, but also in part because I just feel like I'm gonna like this book. I don't really know why, but I just feel like it. It has 3 timelines. It says one is set in Victorian London, where I think we follow a man with an extraordinary memory. One is set in 2014 in Turkey, where this girl is born with a rare disorder that will make her go deaf. And one is set in 2018, again in London, where we meet a hydrologist who escapes like a terrible marriage or something. And I have no idea how these things connect at all, but I'm sure they will. I think one of the themes of this book is like rivers and water, though, so I'm guessing maybe that's what brings these people together or these characters together. I have no idea, but I've heard like I don't think I've heard anything like negative about this book at all. I'm sure there are some people who don't like it, but I heard so many good things. So I'm just guessing I'm gonna love it. Lastly, for this section, we have a classic actually. It's The Blue Castle by Ellen Montgomery. And I've wanted to read this for quite some time, but I could not find an edition that I liked. And then I came across this in a bookshop, and I figured this will do. It's good enough. So I got it. I mostly got this because the author of this also wrote the Anne of Green Gables books, and I just thought it could be interesting to read something else by her. I actually don't know if she's written anything else other than this, but I came across it and I thought it sounded interesting. I don't know that much about this, but it says it follows a 29-year-old woman who lives with her mother and her aunt, and both seem quite overbearing. And she spends most of her time reading like forbidden books, and she escapes into those. And then she gets some sort of message from her doctor, like she finds out something. I'm wondering if she's dying. I don't actually know, but this makes her like go and finally explore the world, this message that she gets from her doctor. And yeah, it'll be interesting to read. I didn't read Anne of Green Gables as a child. I actually read it last year, I think, for the first time, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm excited to read something else by her, although this seems pretty different. Then we have some exciting translated books, and the first one we have is Whale, and I saw this cover like a good while ago and I really liked it, and to be honest, I was interested in this mostly because of the cover in the beginning, but it is also translated from Korean, and I'm always interested in reading more translated books, and yeah, I just really like this cover for some reason. I think this might also be the kind of book where we have sort of like short stories, but they're interconnected and they're all about this small village or town in South Korea. And I think we meet several people in this village, and it mentions that one of them can communicate with elephants and another can control honeybees by whistling. So there seems to be some magical realism element in here. I don't really know. To be honest, it sounds kind of weird, but also interesting. The second one I picked up, honestly, mostly just because I really like the title of this. It's My Grandfather, the Master Detective by Masateru Konishi. And this is translated from Japanese. And just the idea of like a grandpa who's a detective, I just really like that. We meet a school teacher in here who loves classic crime stories and keeps coming across all of these different kinds of mysteries in her everyday life. But she's not that good at solving them, so for that she goes to her grandfather. And it says that they are like a duo that can solve any kind of mystery, and I just love the sound of that. It sounds very much like a cozy kind of mystery situation, and yeah, I just really like the cover of this as well. It just looks so cozy and lovely. I also do really like books where we meet characters where there's like a big age gap. They don't necessarily have to be in the same family, but I really like that. So I feel like this is going to be great. I've never heard anyone talk about this book, but I have a really good feeling about it. Next, I got Days at the Chorunka Cafe by Satoshi Yagisawa. And I got this almost entirely because this author wrote Days at the Murasaki Bookshop, and I really enjoyed that book. So I saw this and I was like, yes, I would like to try that. To be honest, I didn't look into this very much at all. All I know is that it's about a cafe, I think in Tokyo, and it's all about like unexpected connection and like everyday miracles, and I'm sure it will be lovely. I really enjoyed Days at the Murasaki Bookshop. I know not everyone likes that one, but I just really liked it for some reason. I really connected to it. So I'm excited to read something else by this author. At the end, we have two graphic novels, both by the same author and artist, actually. It's these two books, both by Brenna Thumler. So we have Lights and Gumshoe. Lights is the third book in the Sheets series, where the first book is called Sheets. And in that first book, we meet a teenager who like has the weight of the world on her shoulders, and she works in her family's laundry, and one day she meets a ghost, and the story is all about that. I actually have not read the sequel yet, but I do have it, and I've really enjoyed the first book, so I'm excited to read the sequel and this. And I think in this one we actually get the backstory of the ghost, Wendell, and I'm very excited to see his whole story. Gumshoe is a newer release. I think this came out in January, and in this one we meet an 11-year-old girl who lives in a small town full of gossip, and she loves the mail, so like getting and receiving mail. And I'm not sure how that connects to anything, but something happens where someone thinks that she's a bandit, and so she has to go on the run. And why that's like where the mail comes in, I have no idea, but it'll be interesting to see. And this just sounds kind of like funny and crazy to me. I really like this artist's style though, and I especially like her use of color. In this one, it's a little bit different. Ooh, we have these blue pages. That looks really good. But in the Sheets novel, it's very like pastel-y, sort of like summery. Maybe I should add like some of these books to my summer TBR. My summer TBR is already so long, so I don't know if I could squeeze anything in, but I haven't read a lot of graphic novels. I don't think I've read any last year, and I haven't read any this year, so I've really fallen off reading graphic novels. But I love them, so I really want to get back into them. Maybe I will read like all three in a day or something when I have time in the summer. But yeah, I really need to get back into reading graphic novels. We've made it to the end of the pile though. Those were all the books that I had to show you today. Now, I would love to know if you have read any of the books that I mentioned and what you thought, although I do know that some of you have already read some of these books and loved them, so I'm super excited to read those. But if you've read any of the other ones or you're interested in reading about them, I would love to hear about it. And also, if you have picked up any exciting new books lately, tell me all about it in the comments. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!